The Horse Race is brought to you by Benchmark Strategies, Boston's leading public affairs and public relations consulting firm. To learn more, connect with Benchmark on LinkedIn at Benchmark Strategies or visit benchmark-strategies.com. Welcome back to The Horse Race, your weekly look at politics, policy, and elections in Massachusetts. I'm Steve Koczela, president of the MassINC polling group, here with Jennifer Smith, and it is Thursday, December 18th. This is our last pod of 2025, so we're doing what we do and looking back at what made this year crazy and then what's ahead in 2026. And finally, for all of the points, a game of how well do you know Massachusetts? All right, so Jen, it's the end. The end is nigh.
I mean, if by the end being nigh, you don't mean the end of my hellish commute cycle over the past few weeks, that's right. I am not letting us go out of 2025 without complaining about the red line. I would like to say the red line is coming for me. I am sorry to every Green Line rider right now, but all due respect to Phil Eng, the last thing you want to hear when you are waiting on a delayed red line is the comforting voice of the general manager echoing out from the station saying, "Welcome to the MBTA." I was like, get me off the MBTA.
Jen, you find a way to link literally every intro to the MBTA, like without fail.
I mean, it's better than The Bachelor.
All right. Well, today, Jen and I are joined by longtime friends of the pod, Katie Lannan of GBH News. Welcome, Katie.
Hello.
And also Sam Drysdale of the Statehouse News Service. Welcome, Sam.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. And also just want to put my 2 cents in that I am a Green Line rider and we've had a shutdown for the last week, continuing into this week. So I take a lot of personal offense to what Jen just said.
I'm sorry, I know what is the thing? Every family, it's dysfunctional in its own way. Every MBTA commute will be dysfunctional in its own way. Katie, defend yourself. You're a commuter rail person.
Commuter rail, but Orange Line lately, and I've got nothing. It's been delightful.
This is awful. Get off our pod.
To the degree that, a commute can be delightful. I think it's just so I can tell Steve that the Orange Line is going smoothly in his absence.
Yeah, the Orange Line, the Haverhill Line were always good. I do like the sort of festive MBTA colors that you're noting here, though, the red line and the green line. Like, we should do something with that.
Yeah, the two lines that are causing us the most agita right now in the Christmas spirit. I think that's what the Christmas spirit is. Sam, why are they victimizing us?
Yeah, dysfunctional but festive,
Yeah. All right, so now that we have rolled through every one of our MBTA complaints or non-complaint stations, pour one out for a deep cut here, the Boylston Screech on the Green Line that no longer exists. It briefly moved to Park Street. It was the Park Street Screech, and now that is all covered in plastic, and we'll see if it screeches in the new year. So that's what I'm looking forward to personally. I am sort of joking because apparently we are supposed to be talking about actual politics and not simply how long it takes me and how loudly it takes me to get downtown these days. So I think, Steve, if you'll consent to this, we should probably think about the passage of time and what we have reported on during it.
So 2 things I can count on you for, Jen. One is a T-hook, and the other is like metaphysical questions about what we're all really doing here. But I will take us back to the year 2025, since that is still where we're living, and say that this is the year that actually began with Trump's inauguration, amazingly, from which tons of other news flowed, a lot of which had deep impacts here at home. So with that marker as a time frame, I want to start with maybe an easy question, maybe a hard one, and that's what is the biggest politics, policy, or election story in Massachusetts this year? And I'm seeing Sam looking the least puzzled, so I'm going to start with you.
I mean, every big politics story this year has flown from the federal administration. It has all been Trump v. Beacon Hill, I would say, or at least every big story has flown out of that. We've had, ICE and immigration tensions, the question over whether we're getting enough federal money for things like transportation infrastructure and Cape Cod bridges, for SNAP beneficiaries. There's an endless list, and I feel like I could continue to list them, but I don't know if you want to hone in on something more specific. But yeah, Trump v. Beacon Hill, I would say that was the story of the year.
Yeah, I'd certainly buy that. That a lot of the other stories that we could note have flowed from that one. Katie, what stood out to you? Biggest story in Massachusetts this year?
I will go a little more parochial, but also with a long running theme rather than a single story. Beacon Hill versus Diana Dysdale, which started us off as a 2024 story when the auditor campaigned for and won the ballot question, giving her the authority to audit the legislature, whether or not that is kosher under the state constitution, as legislative leaders maintain it isn't. So if that was a 2024 story, 2025 was really the year that Beacon Hill fought back, that they are still engaged in a stalemate over this audit that's now involved the Attorney General as well, and her refusal to represent the auditor in court, which, you know, we've heard various reasonings for, depending on who you ask. The AG says it's because she doesn't have the information she needs and worries about being laughed out of court. The auditor sees more of a conspiracy behind it. So that's another story that's been running all year long, and looks like it'll continue into 2026 as Dysdale tries to push for another ballot question that would open up the legislature's records to the public.
All right, I'm going to take my swing at this and then hand it off to Jenn for the last word. I'm going to add on the NIH grant funding cuts, and specifically just because it's such a huge driver of economic activity here in Massachusetts, and just seeing just the devastation that the medical research community and biotech and life sciences are experiencing here in Massachusetts, and particularly within the higher ed environment, I think is something which we're going to be living with for a long time. So to what's already been said, I would add that story and then hand it off to Jenn for one more story, biggest story in Massachusetts this year.
I really liked the theming that Sam and Katie were working with here, which is Beacon Hill versus who exactly, or whom. And my contribution is going to be basically the theming of Beacon Hill versus municipalities, where I'm kind of on the housing and courts beat. And so we have been, as we are with the auditors kind of universe here, stuck in the middle of a multi-year cycle over the MBTA Communities Act, which at its core is not just about should cities and towns zone for more multifamily housing near transit, but specifically to what extent can the state just say, go ahead and do this thing that we want you to do. The crisis is profound enough. You have to rezone. We are going to change your rules. And that's really kind of, I think, brought up a lot of very not even lingering, but very kind of surface level feelings that a lot of municipalities have about kind of the grand tradition of local control, what that means they should be able to ask of the legislature, and what the legislature's kind of responsibility is to accommodate local interests and character. And so not only has that been something that's been rolling along over this last year, but it is now set to be back in front of the state's highest court next year. We now have February arguments set for the MBTA communities question at the SJC Part 2 over whether or not those very legislators actually created an unfunded mandate for these cities and towns by saying you have to rezone. So that's never gone to the high court before, but it is going to, once again, just like last year, because everything that's old was new again, after the year-end deadline of compliance passes again. The high court will hear whether or not they should have had to comply in the first place. So that is my answer.
All right. Well, that one's certainly going to continue and leads us into our next question, which is, which story do you think will actually have the longest lasting impact? So what happened in 2025 do you think we'll still be talking about or dealing with the impacts of in, say, 2030, 2035? What stories are going to kind of roll forward, appear in explainer videos 5 years from now? And this time I'm going to start with Katie.
Well, I think I'll crib from Sam's last answer on this one. And I think as we wait and see what the ultimate impact of federal funding cuts will be, that's going to have huge downstream ramifications. And I think we might not know the extent of it for several more years. If you look at something unrelated, sort of, but as an example, local aid in the state budget, unrestricted local aid, was cut during the Great Recession, 2008 to 2010 time frame. And that's just this past budget cycle, this current budget cycle, it's just back up above those levels now. So it takes the state, when there's budget turmoil, understandably, a long time to kind of put things back together, to bounce back from cuts when there's a big economic downturn. And we'll see what kinds of services people can receive could be affected. There could be a lot of moving parts. And maybe that's just on my head right now, because as we sit taping this, we're about to hear budget forecasts for the state revenue picture. So that might just be on my mind at the moment. But I think that's kind of the obvious answer, because that is going to be a multi-year reaction.
Katie, we count on you for keeping the calendar on these truly nerdy, like insider Statehouse dates that we should all be aware of.
I can't believe you don't have Consensus Revenue Hearing Day on your calendar, Steve. You're just jumping right ahead to Consensus Revenue Number Deadline Day. You're already thinking January.
I was going to say, Katie, the thing is, you've wished me a happy one of these days in past podcasts, and I always forget to get you a card. So next time, just give me a couple weeks heads up.
I did notice you blitzed right past Joint Rule 10 Day this year without a single mention. No card for me. I'll recover eventually.
All right, Jen, you're next. What is the story that we're going to be talking about in 5 or 10 years?
Man, I wish I could just stick on the holiday card schedule. That sounds much nicer. I'll kind of pick an angle of the federal question, which is kind of the climate of it all. I started covering sort of the implications of changes in federal policy around kind of how we not just set climate goals or invest in green energy, but also in how we even measure what kind of the risk of climate change is going to be earlier this year. And one example of that, which kind of might feel very small, but we talked about at the time, is FEMA has been changing the way that it approaches kind of what tools should be available to folks. And so that means that, there's this long-standing erosion map that they had that was pioneered in New England, started on Nantucket, is really widely used across the region to basically see what it will look like if more and more of our coastline kind of gets carved away over time. Where is it safe to build housing, not because they're in a floodplain, but because there might not be land there in the future. And so tools like that have just kind of been taken off of federal sites. And so to that extent, the question of whether or not we will have good data going forward to figure out kind of what the climate threats are is, I think, something that's going to have really profound ripple effects going forward. We have crazy erosion here. We are getting hotter summers. We are getting damper seasons. And our ability to predict that is getting more and more uncertain. And so in 5 or 10 years, we will find out how bad that got.
Yeah, definitely. And I, again, will add my own and then give Sam the final word. And I would say, adding to earlier, my thought on NIH cuts is international students at our colleges and universities. So immigration policies have been having huge impacts on what students can be recruited. The same NIH cuts actually have just meant that there's less to do, less jobs, less grad students needed, et cetera. So sometimes I think we don't give enough attention to the ways that they actually help colleges and universities, particularly public ones, balance their budgets just by paying lots more tuition than domestic students tend to pay. So I think that's one that down the road we'll be asking ourselves tough budget questions that come back to the fact that we've made it much harder for international students to come here to Massachusetts. So Sam, on to you then. Biggest story that we'll be talking about in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I'll say, while there's so much to say about the impacts of federal policy to bring us back local, that a big story that emerged this year is how many communities were doing local overrides to pay for schools. And I think that that's something that has ripple effects for municipalities for years to come, that towns and cities just can't pay for schools anymore. Inflation is just so outpaced what municipalities can now pay for, as property taxes can no longer pay for services. It's something that the state is really struggling to contend with what they can contribute to pay for schools. But here on Beacon Hill, they've now got some commissions studying the formula to pay for schools. It's something that I specifically really nerd out on, which is maybe why I'm thinking about it. But it's something that on the most fundamental level of, what does state government do? What does local government do? It pays for kids to get educated, and it's something that Massachusetts really prides itself in, and is something that the government is struggling with at the moment, and kind of failing to be able to provide for a lot of students, and needing to do these complicated overrides in order to be able to provide. That was a big story that emerged this year on the local level, while all of this other complicated federal stuff was also happening.
And so to kind of keep on the theme of Beacon Hill versus everyone here, it's not just other former lawmakers, it's not just the federal government, it's not just municipalities, it's also potential voters, oddly enough, because one of the things that's going to keep us very busy in 2026 is a potential slew of ballot measures, maybe up to 12, which makes my little California heart feel like I've gone right back home and I would like to leave again. So I'm going to, I think, kick this over to you, Katie. When lawmakers talk about ballot measures and what they represent, it becomes a kind of very complicated push and pull between our people or constituents signaling that there's something that they want lawmakers to do and they're kind of stuck using this sort of blunt instrument to do it? Or is this a sign that there's kind of muddied interest, inappropriately inserting themselves into the kind of legislative process? So I think that's a long way to basically ask, do lawmakers think that there's something wrong when we see this many ballot measures? Do they think they're being transparent and responsive, etc.?
I think the legislature so far this year feels very confident in some of the new transparency and efficiency-minded reforms they adopted in what was another kind of Beacon Hill milestone this year, the first year in a few years that they've had agreement between the House and the Senate on rules that govern their operations. So My general sense is that the legislature feels things are working. They are frustrated, at least leadership is a little bit frustrated, as you alluded to, Jen, with the idea that there are so many ballot questions in the mix that, for the legislature, if they're not acting on something, if they're not taking up a policy, that's a choice. That's often because they don't think it's a priority or they don't think it's something that needs to be done. So, in some way, by not taking up some of these measures that advocates have been pushing for years, that's the decision they're making. So they do see, in some cases, it as an end round. They say that they are frustrated by the idea of special interests maybe buying a law. But I think it'll also be really interesting to see, because Beacon Hill, as we all know, is motivated by a deadline. We'll get the questions certified. We'll know how many are in the mix in January. There's another kind of deadline there after that for if they want to keep these off the ballot. We could see a real flurry of deal making, of bargaining. I'm thinking of, I believe it was 2018, the so-called grand bargain law that got us paid family and medical leave, that raised the minimum wage, that eliminated time and a half pay on Sundays, and made the sales tax holiday a permanent feature of state law. I am waiting to see just how much of an appetite the legislature has for bargaining, for working with some of these groups that they've been critical of, but that the voters might not be so critical of.
All right, Sam, you have anything kind of you want to add into that one before I ask Steve if he still thinks ballot measures suck?
Yeah, I guess what I would add is we hear a lot from progressive transparency groups that Beacon Hill isn't passing enough laws, that Massachusetts is the least productive legislature in the country. And we do pass, among the least amount of laws in the country. And I think, especially in the first year of the legislative cycle of our 2-year legislative session, that is really apparent. And in this year, especially, we can see that they passed one single law that was a non-spending law, that was a major, what we would call a major law, that wasn't, for a sick leave bank for a public employee, or a liquor license for Acton or something. It was a response law for what the legislature is calling their response to the Trump administration, and really it just expanded on a law that they had previously passed. It expanded on the SHIELD law that protects reproductive rights and transgender health protections. So, they did accomplish that, but it was the one major law that they passed this session. We do typically see more major laws being passed in the second year of the legislative session, so we'll see more happening next year. But for groups that are going to point to the slowness and unproductiveness of the legislature in order to make their argument for why the ballot process is a more effective way to legislate, they could easily point to a year like this last one to say, well, this is why we need to use the ballot.
So, Steve, the last time we talked about this was a cycle where we had the, completely insane number of 6 potential and 5 ultimate ballot measures. Do you feel better about it this year? Do you think things are going well?
It's not to me, it's not so much the number. It's just that the process isn't doing what I think any defender of like open democracy would hope. It's attracting enormous amounts of money to these ballot questions. They're very often groups that aren't even from Massachusetts, using our state as a laboratory or trying to push something that they've pushed elsewhere. This is not the ideal, like some sort of Norman Rockwell democracy where it's a group of concerned citizens getting together in their living room and deciding that they're going to push for change. This is usually very well-funded groups doing something that, may or may not have even originated in Massachusetts. So I maintain it is still not working, regardless of how many questions we have. Whether we have 1, whether we have 10, we still need to have a talk about what we're doing and whether it's still the right way to do it.
To Steve's point there, I guess I'll just add that another thing I am watching in 2026 is whether we see action from the legislature on a bill that would require more regular campaign finance reporting from ballot questions, with the idea of letting voters have more of a real-time glimpse into who is paying for and spending what as these measures advance.
I think that's a really good point as well, because the theme around what do lawmakers mean when they talk about kind of transparency, what do advocates mean when they talk about transparency, and then what a kind of just members of the public think is meant when we talk about transparency are not always, a Venn diagram that's actually a circle. Sometimes it's just completely different bubbles spread all over the place with nary an overlap there. So, especially given that the ballot measure that Diana DiZoglio is pushing this year is very specifically targeted at one of the things that makes Massachusetts very unusual, which is that all 3 branches of our government in some way say that they are exempt from public records laws. This ballot measure would make the legislature and the governor's office have to abide by public records laws. One of the matters that's not considered appropriate for the ballot is things that impact the judiciary. So that's kind of a different and complicated question. But Sam, I am curious, how do you think the question of transparency has been handled on Beacon Hill kind of in a practical manner? Have they been making gestures that seem to be borne out, or are they kind of talking about transparency and that's sort of behaving in the same way? What's it been looking like this year?
Yeah, I think that, as Katie mentioned earlier, there was, you know, progress made this year in that the House and Senate came to an agreement on their rules for the first time in what, 6 years, 5 years, something in that, since the pandemic, and agreed to a few measures in the name of transparency, I would say. A few of those have had marked differences. Joint Roll 10 Day got a shout out earlier.
See, they're important. No card from you either, though, Sam.
Yeah, that got moved up. And to those who don't know what Joint Roll 10 Day is for whatever reason,
Get off the podcast.
it means that the reporting deadline for when a committee needs to make a favorable or unfavorable decision on a bill got moved up considerably earlier in the legislative cycle. And that was in an effort to make the bills move faster, to get them on an earlier timeline, and to be more transparent. However, what we're seeing in practice is that the Senate completed all of their bills by Joint Roll 10 Day, and the House is now doing a series of long extension orders. As I sit in the House chamber over the last few weeks, doing House session copy, writing down all of the things that the House is doing, it has just been hundreds of extension orders as representatives are sending bills to have months longer for consideration, which is really just kind of a way for them to get around that agreement that they came to with the Senate. So while I would say there was maybe an effort towards transparency earlier this year, it does feel like the chambers are maybe now just trying to get around the rules that they set for themselves, which is I guess always the they make the rules, they can break the rules. They're rules, they're not laws. They're allowed to break them.
So it feels in a way like it's Beacon Hill versus its own rules in some way, if we're continuing the theme of Beacon Hill versus everyone and everything. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there with our look back to 2025. Looking forward to 2026, we have elections, we have ballot questions, and we will be back in 2026 to talk about all of that. But before we end this podcast, we actually have a bit of trivia, and we'll get to that right after the break.
I'm Zainab Asma-Doyle, Research Director at the MassINC Polling Group. The MassINC Polling Group serves the region's leading foundations, political groups, government entities, and businesses. Our surveys and focus groups bring high-quality data to the toughest questions facing society today. Learn more at massincpolling.com.
And that brings us to our final segment, which this week is brought to you by our year-end Massachusetts Trivia Department here at the Horse Race. I have questions. They are impossible. I didn't write them, nor do I know the answers to them. So we're going to learn something here together on the podcast. The first question is, in the last 100 years, from chocolate chip cookies to birth control pills, our fair Commonwealth has produced many important inventions. In fact, exactly 100 years ago, 2 of the following 3 inventions changed the world. 1 million points to identify which one was not invented in 1925. So the first one is the Brannock device, the metal plate with adjustable sliders used in shoe stores to determine shoe size. That's apparently called a Brannock device. Didn't know that before. Duct tape, with or without the T. Added adhesive backing to strong waterproof duck canvas, or fast freezing foods, which was apparently, according to this, invented by the Gloucester Frozen Food Company and revolutionized the way people eat. So which one of those was not invented in 1925?
Okay, I have only one guess for what one was invented in 1920. I feel like flash frozen foods are actually older than people think they are. That's my probably completely wrong guess there, but I feel like food science has been a more rapid process than we sometimes talk about. So if we're gonna do this I don't know, whatever game show style, I would like to eliminate that answer and we can all just agree and slowly whittle down.
I arbitrarily just want to pick duct tape. I have no rhyme or reason to that. It's a vibes-based choice. So I guess I would agree with Jen's elimination of frozen foods.
I'm feeling a bit defensive of duct tape. I feel like it's been around for a while. And I want to give it its due. I think it's a century old. I would cast my vote for the Brannick device.
I actually, you know what, would be willing to go along with the Brannick device because, like, mass market sizing is pretty new.
Interesting. So I think that what we are doing is fighting the premise, and I'm proud of us for this. What we are demonstrating is solidarity and not being pitted against each other. So
there is actually an answer to this. We don't have to just argue and speculate.
No, we're agreeing. All right, Steve, which one is it?
Okay, so I didn't know this, but the answer to which one is not 100 years old is actually duct tape.
I win! I'm so sorry.
Invented
I led us
in
astray.
1943 and as a part of the war effort. So there you go.
That's so interesting. All right. Okay. Shame us again.
All right. So on to the next one. According to legend, in 1876, two brothers in Westport, Massachusetts, developed a delicious variety of root vegetable. It's still iconic throughout New England and usually mashed with pepper and salt. What is the name of this? Is it the Haydenville hot potato, the Revere rutabaga, or the Macomber turnip?
The turnip, also vibes-based.
Yeah, I see, the problem is I just like the word rutabaga. So like my vibes are also, I would just like to say for the record, when I was a little baby journalism student and the question was whether or not I would be doing my co-op at boston.com or the Globe's like night shift metro thing, they had you answer a bunch of Boston trivia questions when you were trying for the boston.com co-op, like the history of like marshmallow fluff or something. And this is giving me hostile flashbacks. So I'm going with rutabaga because it makes me feel better to say it.
If it's bringing you joy, I'll join the rutabaga camp.
Thanks, Sam.
But I'm afraid to go against Katie again because I led you astray last time.
So, Katie, your answer was the turnip, and we have 2 for rutabaga. All right. Well, Katie now has 2 billion trivia points. She is 2
I am
for
going
2.
to become unstoppable. I'm going to buy your whole podcast in trivia points.
You're going to become insufferable.
Become. Okay.
The third one is Virginia is sometimes given the nickname the Mother of Presidents as it holds the record for the most presidents born in the state with 8. The run-up is our great state, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, with 4 presidents. So you get 1 billion trivia points for each of the 4 presidents born here in Massachusetts that you can name.
Okay, it's John Adams, John Quincy Adams,
George
JFK.
W. Bush.
All right, that's 4.
Yeah. Did we
So
win?
I count 2 billion for Sam on that and 1 billion each for Katie and Jen, just sort of listening. So I think Katie ends up with what was said? Oh.
I said W.
Ooh.
Was that wrong? Is it HW?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, you lose all your trivia points, Katie. I'm
No, I
afraid,
don't.
according to the rules.
I'm stockpiling. You can't reach them from here.
Forfeit.
All right, well, we'll have to consult with our lawyers and the rules to the sweepstakes on that item. Unfortunately, or fortunately for you, if you've already tuned out, that is all the time we have for today. We will see you next year with a great lineup of guests. I'm Steve Koczela, signing off with Jenn Smith, Sam Drysdale, and Katie Lannan. Our production and theme music is done by Charlie Koczela. You can write to us here at thehorseracepodcast@gmail.com with your own ideas for trivia in the future. Don't forget to give The Horse Race a review wherever you're hearing us now. Subscribe to Commonwealth Beacon's daily download, and reach out to us here at the MassINC Polling Group if you need polls or focus groups done. For now, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.